What German generals said about Eisenhower's biggest mistake. It is a question that echoes through the corridors of military history, a subject of intense debate for decades. Was there a single, fateful decision in the European theater that prolonged the bloodiest conflict in human history? A decision that, in the view of the defeated enemy commanders, cost thousands of lives and allowed the Nazi war machine a final, desperate gasp. This is not a story of a battle lost, but of a strategic opportunity seemingly within grasp and then, deliberately let go. It is the story of the late summer of 1944, when the armies of the free world raced across France in euphoric pursuit of a shattered enemy. And it is the story of a monumental command decision made by Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. To understand it, we must transport ourselves to a specific point in time, early September 1944, the location, the tangled, dense woodlands and ancient border fortifications of the German West Wall, known to the Allies as the Siegfried Line, the units, the weary but victorious men of the U.S. 12th and British 21st Army Groups, and facing them, the broken remnants of Army Group B, commanded by a man who would later be the most vocal critic of all, General Field Marshal Walter Model. By the first week of September 1944, the Allied advance following the Normandy breakout and the liberation of Paris had reached a fever pitch. The German army in the West was in a state of near-total collapse. The Falaise Pocket had been liquidated, with tens of thousands of veterans killed or captured. What remained of Model's forces was a disorganized mass, retreating eastwards in chaos. They possessed perhaps 100 serviceable tanks across the entire front. Allied intelligence reported that the German defense line along the Siegfried Line was more a theoretical concept than a command position, a ghost front. The war, too many optimistic Allied soldiers and correspondents, looked like it could be over by Christmas. Our main characters in this drama are the commanders whose names are etched in history. On the Allied side, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, a man burdened by the political and logistical necessity of holding a fragile coalition together. Beneath him, two towering, yet starkly contrasting figures, General Bernard Law Montgomery, commander of the British 21st Army Group, and General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army. Montgomery, meticulous, cautious, and insistent on a single, powerful thrust. Patton, flamboyant, aggressive, believing in relentless pursuit and exploiting weakness. Their rivalry was the engine of Allied strategy. Opposing them was General Field Marshal Walter Model, the Führer's fireman, a ruthless defensive specialist. Model knew his forces were on the brink of annihilation. His only hope was time to scrape together shattered divisions, to rush Volkssturm militia and teenage conscripts to the front, and to rebuild a coherent defensive line before the Allies crossed the Rhine River, the last natural barrier guarding the German heartland. The critical moment was now. The strategic situation presented Eisenhower with a fundamental choice: continue the broad front advance, supplying all army groups equally but diluting offensive power, or concentrate all available fuel and supplies into a single, narrow, and potentially war-ending thrust, as demanded by Montgomery, into the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial furnace. In the first days of September, the tension was not on the battlefield, but at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. On the ground, Allied spearheads were moving so fast they were outstripping their own supply lines. The Red Ball Express, a monumental trucking effort, was straining every sinew to bring fuel and ammunition forward from the Normandy beaches, over 400 miles to the rear. Patton's Third Army was literally running on fumes. His tanks, having liberated much of eastern France, were idling on empty, just 60 miles from the Saar region and the weakly defended Siegfried Line. To the north, Montgomery's forces had captured the vital port of Antwerp virtually intact on September 4th, but the Scheldt estuary, the 50-mile waterway leading to the port, remained firmly in German hands, rendering Antwerp useless. Montgomery's eyes were fixed not on opening this crucial supply route, but on a daring, audacious plan, Operation Market Garden. He envisioned using 3 airborne divisions, the U.S. 101st and 82nd, and the British First to seize a series of bridges in the Netherlands, culminating at Arnhem. Over the lower Rhine, this airborne carpet would allow his British XX Corps to punch across the Rhine and flank the Siegfried Line entirely, plunging into the North German plain. By 1400 hours on September 10th, the command crisis reached its peak. Eisenhower, still recovering from a knee injury, flew to Montgomery's headquarters in Brussels. The meeting was tense. Montgomery, according to accounts, dismissed Eisenhower's staff and launched into a forceful, even disrespectful, demand for total priority for his northern thrust. He argued that Patton must be stopped completely to provide the supplies for Market Garden and the 21st Army Group. Eisenhower believed in the broad front. It was a political imperative to keep the large American public and military committed, and it prevented the Germans from concentrating against a single point. But under Montgomery's pressure, he made a fateful compromise. He gave Market Garden conditional approval and allocated its supplies. Patton's advance, the most successful ground offensive in the European theater, was to be deliberately slowed. What did this look like on the ground? For the men of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division, approaching the German border near Aachen, the heady days of pursuit were ending. They began to encounter sporadic, then determined, resistance from small groups of German paratroopers and engineer battalions rushed to the front. The Ghost Front was coming to life. With every hour that Patton's tanks sat idle, and every day that Montgomery prepared his complex airborne operation, German forces coalesced. Meanwhile, in his headquarters, General Field Marshal Model could scarcely believe his luck. The relentless pressure from Patton in the south had eased. The Allies were not driving headlong into the Saar, Germany's second most important industrial region. Instead, intelligence pointed to a major operation in the north. It gave him precious days. He and his chief of staff, General Lieutenant Hans Krebs, worked around the clock. They funneled every available Tiger and Panther tank from repair depots. They organized retreating infantry into Kampftruppen battle groups. The 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions, refitting after Normandy, were serendipitously placed near Arnhem. The First Army, under General Hodges, probed the Siegfried Line and found it manned, but thinly. Reports from frontline patrols spoke of old men and boys in uniform, manning concrete pillboxes with inadequate weapons. The sense among the junior officers and seasoned NCOs was one of a fleeting chance slipping away. The West, a line of dragon's teeth, anti-tank obstacles, and mutually supporting bunkers, would not have to hold an alert assault immediately. The crisis for Germany was abating. The crisis, from the German perspective, had been the last week of August. Now, by mid-September, the crisis shifted decisively to the Allies. It manifested in two catastrophic ways. First, the squandered opportunity in the south. Patrols from the U.S. 5th Armored Division had reached the Siegfried Line on September 11th. They found fortifications built in the 1930s, many stripped of weapons for the Atlantic WWII. The defensive line was a shell. A concentrated, fully supplied thrust by Patton's Third Army, at that moment, would have likely broken through into the open, undefended terrain of western Germany. Second, the unfolding disaster of Operation Market Garden. On September 17th, thousands of Allied paratroopers descended into the Netherlands. Initially successful, the operation quickly met with fierce, unexpected resistance from those very SS Panzer divisions Model had stationed nearby. Image 22, SS Panzer, counterattack, Panther, at Arnhem, the British 1st Airborne Division landed 8 miles from their crucial bridge at Arnhem, and were immediately pinned down by 2 SS Panzer Corps for 9 days. They fought a desperate, heroic, and ultimately doomed battle. The single highway for the 30th Corps' advance became a deadly gauntlet, earning the nickname Hell's Highway. German counterattacks severed the road repeatedly. At Arnhem, the final bridge, the last bridge to cross the Lower Rhine, proved to be a bridge too far. The impossible situation was this. Eisenhower's compromise had effectively halted the one army group that was positioned for an immediate, war-winning breakthrough, while betting on a higher scareborne operation that was now failing spectacularly. The human cost was immense. The British 1st Airborne Division was all but destroyed, suffering over 7,500 casualties. Total Allied losses in Market Garden exceeded 15,000 men. And for what gain? A 50-mile salient leading nowhere that would have to be defended at great cost throughout the bitter winter. The Rhine remained uncrossed. Germany had been given the one thing it needed most, a full month to recover. But Patton's war diary for September and October is a litany of frustration. "We have, at present, the greatest chance to win the war ever presented," he wrote. "We must do something now, or we will be caught in the spring with a still potent Germany." His pleas for fuel were denied. His armies, capable of blitzkrieg, were reduced to fighting local, infantry-heavy battles to capture isolated forts. The moment of supreme vulnerability had passed. By late September, Model had moved 5 rebuilt divisions into the Saar sector. The opportunity was gone, sealed shut by a lack of gasoline and a Supreme Command decision. In the soggy fields of the Netherlands and the cold, misty valleys of the Hurtgen Forest, Allied soldiers now faced a reconstituted enemy. The fear that had gripped the retreating Germans in August now gripped the Allied infantrymen. They were no longer chasing a broken foe. They were assaulting fortified positions held by a desperate enemy whose command had been granted a miraculous reprieve. The deafening roar of artillery was no longer their own, moving forward, but German 88mm and Nebelwerfer rockets hammering their static positions. The war of movement was over. The war of attrition had begun. There was no dramatic, battlefield turning point in this story. The turning point was a decision made in quiet headquarters after the fact, and in the stark reflections of the German generals who were interrogated following their surrender. The heroic decision, in their eyes, was the one Eisenhower did not make. From 1945 onward, captured German senior officers were extensively interviewed by Allied historians. Their consensus was nearly unanimous. General Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the venerable Commander-in-Chief West, Stated plainly, the Allied breakthrough after the Normandy beachhead and the subsequent chase across France brought German forces to the brink of annihilation. The halt of Patton's Third Army at the Metz Fortress and the West Wall in early September was our salvation. He believed a concentrated thrust, either by Patton toward Frankfurt or by a combined effort toward the Saar, would have ended the war in 1944, but the most scathing critique came from Eisenhower's direct opponent, Walter Model. Before his suicide in April 1945, he discussed the September lull with his staff. His chief of operations, General Major Siegfried Westphal, later wrote, "Model always said, the most dangerous moment was the first half of September. If the Allies had continued their pressure without pause, the Germans could not have held the West. They would have been forced to retreat east of the Rhine, losing the industrial capacity of the Ruhr and Saar. The war would have ended." How did the Germans overcome impossible odds? They didn't. The Allies, in the German view, overcame them for the Germans. The solution for Model was Eisenhower's commitment to the broad front strategy and the diversion of resources to Market Garden. The German recovery was a masterpiece of improvisation under pressure, but it was only possible because the pressure was relieved at the critical juncture. They rushed 20,000 fortress troops, policemen, and sailors to man the Siegfried Line. They activated Volksgrenadier divisions, scraped together tanks from repair shops, and deployed the first jet aircraft, the Messerschmitt 262, in small numbers. They used the time bought by Allied indecision to transform a chaotic mob into a defensive force with a coherent command structure and a will to fight for the homeland. The turning point, therefore, was not one of action, but of inaction. It was the point where the relentless pursuit mandated by Blitzkrieg doctrine was replaced by caution, logistical calculation, and interallied politics. The Germans, masters of the concentrated punch, could not comprehend why it was not used against them when they were prostrate. In their eyes, Eisenhower, for all his skills as a diplomat and coalition builder, had made his biggest mistake. He had chosen the politically safe path over the militarily decisive one. The resolution of this decision was the brutal, costly winter of 1944-45. The battles that followed the bloody meat grinder of the Hurtgen Forest, which cost the U.S. First Army over 33,000 casualties for no strategic gain. The bitter fight for Aachen, the first German city to be besieged. And, most dramatically, the surprise German offensive in the Ardennes that December, known as the Battle of the Bulge, were all direct consequences of the German recovery enabled in September. The Battle of the Bulge alone resulted in approximately 80,000 American and 100,000 German casualties. Thousands of these men would not have died had the German army not been given those critical weeks to reorganize, rearm, and plan a final, desperate counteroffensive. The war in Europe, which seemed so close to ending in September, dragged on for another 8 months, culminating in May 1945. The human cost of those extra months, for soldiers and civilians alike, is incalculable. Eisenhower's legacy was, of course, ultimately that of a victorious supreme commander. He received the gratitude of nations and later became President of the United States. No official recognition or medal was stripped for his September decision. Indeed, his leadership of the complex alliance is still rightfully celebrated. Montgomery received a promotion to Field Marshal, though Market Garden haunted his career. Patton, forever embittered by what he saw as a lost chance, would die in a car accident after the war in Europe had concluded. But the historical significance of this moment, as framed by the German generals, forces a sobering counterfactual consideration. It highlights the immense weight of command decisions, where logistics, personality, and politics can outweigh pure military opportunity. It is a case study in the fog of war at the strategic level. The German commanders, from their unique vantage point of total defeat, identified a precise hinge in history, a 2-week period, where the trajectory of the war changed from sudden collapse to protracted, brutal struggle. Their testimony is not a claim of German superiority, but a stark lesson in the necessity of finishing a defeated enemy without respite. In the end, Eisenhower's biggest mistake, as they saw it, was an air of mercy and unconscious granting of a respite that allowed a wounded beast one last ferocious and costly roar. The echoes of that roar would be heard in the forests of the Ardennes and the frozen fields of the Rhineland, paid for in the blood of thousands who might otherwise have seen Christmas at home in peace.